All right, welcome to Halitics. So glad to be talking to you this new year, and even happier to be discussing with Charlie Cooper from Get Money Out Maryland the impact of the recent decisions in 4 states by secretaries of state and Supreme Courts of those states with regard to Trump's ballot access in the upcoming elections. And I got to say, Charlie, I think my caption here for this program, and Happy New Year also, is a little bit misleading because they say, what do the decisions blocking Trump in the ballot mean for our nation? And really, as I look through the decisions, none of them really do block him. I mean, the conclusion is that he should be blocked, but they're stayed. So for now, am I wrong? He's on the ballot, or is likely to be on the ballot in all the primary states.
Hey, everybody. Let's hope that 2024 is better than 2023. Happy New Year to you. Yes, he's not going to be off of any ballots, it doesn't look like. And one of the reasons for that is that ballots in most of these states have to be decided by January the 4th or 5th or whatever. And everyone who's making these decisions is giving time for higher courts to make a decision. And I did have a letter to the editor in the Sun today. If you can read the Sun online or in print, it's there, saying that the Supreme Court should resolve this. And there are 2 separate questions. The first question is Donald Trump eligible to be president? That's the most important question. And that's a U.S. constitutional question. And so it would just be best if the Supreme Court would just decide the thing. The second thing is, can Donald Trump appear on the ballot? So if he's eligible to be president, he can appear on the ballot. That's obvious. If he's not eligible to be president, many states bar ineligible people from being on the ballot, but not every state. Maryland, for example, does not bar ineligible people from being on the ballot. And then the third thing is primary rules and general election rules in the states can be different. States run the presidential election. The federal government doesn't run the presidential election. So it's a complex picture.
All right, pardon the pause there, folks. I was just looking up your article, Charlie, in the Baltimore Sun as you were speaking, and congratulations on that publication. We'll show it to the folks in just a moment. You're leading the effort here to keep Trump off the ballot in the Free State, obviously, or it appears obvious, although you didn't say it was a definite situation. The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, will have to decide, and that decision should rule the land, be the law of the land. What's the strategy? Let's put aside the tactics, but the long-term strategy. Is this a strategy that's designed to re-elect Joe Biden? Is it a strategy to keep Trump off the ballot? Would it be a successful strategy if the end result is President Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis?
Well, to me, the long-term strategy is to follow the Constitution because it's a very divided country. And I happen to think, I have a lot of experience playing like pickup games, basketball or some other game. And I always feel like, wouldn't it be good if the players would go by the rules? And often when you're in pickup games, that doesn't happen. But the rules here are set by the U.S. Constitution. So I just think the country could be headed for violence, but the way to minimize the violence is to go by the Constitution. So my highest level strategy thought is, let's go by the Constitution. Okay. To me, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is very clear, but I also recognize that that the Supreme Court is the highest authority to interpret it. And so let's have them interpret it. And they might try to duck it or they might dawdle. And I think that would be unfortunate.
All right, you're
Yeah,
listening to. Oh, go ahead, Charlie. One more thing.
well, the second thing I would say is personally, I think Donald Trump did engage in insurrection, and I think he isn't qualified to serve in any office in the United States. Okay. So he couldn't be a member of the town council in Palm Springs, Florida, or in New Jersey, or wherever he's claiming to live. And um, and so my strategy would be, another goal I would have is that he not be allowed to serve in office.
Well, you can see the 14th Amendment, Section 3, is on the screen right now. And there are a lot of questions that have arisen. And let's see if you can respond to a few of them with regard to the application of this amendment to what happened on January 6th in the United States 2021, and whether that, in fact, should mean Trump is barred from the ballot going forward to run for any office. Now, one argument I heard, I just want to leave this on the screen for a second, and this is from a lawyer. He said to me, and I think it was somewhat sophistic. In other words, he was engaging in argument. It was Socratic, but I think he was serious as well. And one court, at least, I think may have ruled this. It's certainly been an argument by Trump, is that the presidency is not comprehended by this amendment. The argument that this lawyer made to me was, it's very clear that senators, House representatives, electors cannot run if they were previously in office when they took action against the United States in some form. But since they don't identify the presidency, and since they very clearly identify these other offices, then the presidency is not included. So I just thought I would give you that argument, because I don't think it's completely make weight. I think there's something to it. I don't say it carries the day, but I'd like your response to that argument, Charlie.
Yeah, well, that's what the lower court in Colorado said, and the higher court in Colorado, all Democrats, overturned it by 4-3, which means 3 of the Democrats on the Colorado court agreed with that finding. So it's not a ridiculous thing. I mean, it is true that the word president isn't on there. Sometimes some of these issues can be resolved by examining the legislative record. In other words, you go back to the 1860s and you see the different versions that they had. You see the discussions in committee, in the congressional record, and you decide if they explicitly meant to exclude the presidency. And I just don't think, I mean, I wish it were some other way, because I intensely dislike the makeup of the current Supreme Court. But I just don't see any alternative to saying the Supreme Court's going to decide this.
All right. And what about the argument, which is more obviously substantive as opposed to procedural? Procedural with respect to whether this amendment does apply and what it requires, what kind of process it requires. But just from a purely substantive impact on the country, that who is the president is the ultimate democratic decision. It's ultimately up to the people to decide. We know what happened on January 6th. I mean, there's been tons of video footage. This has been analyzed to death. Shouldn't the people get to decide whether they believe Trump is disqualified from office? And if not disqualified, whether he's the one who should get elected?
I think that's a lawless opinion. The Constitution says if it applies to the presidency, and if he participated, engaged, rebelled, gave aid and comfort, it's pretty hard for me to see how you could think that he didn't do any of those things. I'm sure there are millions of people who disagree with me. Anyway, if he's disqualified under the amendment and it's in the Constitution, it's the highest law of the land, we have to go with that. Otherwise, what are the rules? There's no rules, and everybody can make up anything they want. And of course, that's the essence of Trump.
Well, I mean, you could say that
he makes
there
up
is
the
a rule,
rules,
but
and
the
you
rule,
do whatever he said. And if he says opposite things on Tuesday and Thursday, that's fine. So I just believe in having the rules, understanding them, and going by them.
Well, that's very fair what you just said. And I want to just rephrase a little bit. When the rules aren't as clear cut as any of us would like, such as I think we can agree Amendment 14, Section 3 is not a model of opacity, or it is a model of opacity. In such a situation, then isn't it the better course to defer to the people's will? Now, if Trump were convicted, if he is convicted, then that would seem clear, depending on what the conviction is for, that yes, he did engage in high crime or misdemeanor, or specifically a crime that's comprehended or subsumed within this amendment. But absent that type of process provided, then the better course of wisdom is not to interfere with an election, especially when obviously so many people are going to be so angry, and we are risking some type of violent response.
Yeah. So first of all, to me, the question of putting him on the ballot is, in terms of the wisdom of putting him on the ballot, if he's ineligible, I think that's ridiculous. So I think the eligibility question should be resolved. Second of all, I think the question of whether it applies to the presidency is a live question. But the idea that you should defer it because he hasn't been convicted, there's just no historical precedent for that. Everyone who's been disqualified under this has not been convicted of insurrection. And in fact, the Insurrection Act that we have today didn't come until 80 years after the amendment was written. And not only that, thousands of people excluded themselves from running because they understood they were barred, and they weren't convicted. They were Confederates who had held office, and then they joined the Confederacy, and then they didn't run. But several people were elected, and the Congress excluded them. Courts have excluded people. And beyond all this, you are entitled to a certain kind of trial if you're accused of a crime where the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Being qualified for the presidency is not a situation where you're entitled to a procedure where the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, so just like, and this example from popular culture is the one I use because I think most people are familiar with it. Michael Jackson was accused of child abuse. Okay, he was not convicted. But when he was sued, he was ordered to pay millions of dollars because that's a separate action, and that action requires
it's a different standard. It's a different burden of proof. It's beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah,
for
anyone
criminals
who's accused of having taken the oath of office and then breaking it and engaging in insurrection, rebellion, or aiding and abetting has a right to due process. And in my opinion, Donald Trump is getting that. Couey Griffin in New Mexico, who was removed from office by a court in New Mexico in 2022, got due process. And other people, there are probably hundreds of people right now who participated in January 6th in some way, many of whom have been convicted, but they would still get a due process if they try to run for office and someone challenges their eligibility. It would be a separate due process.
Hey, Charlie, it's really great to talk to you. You're watching and listening to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Please click subscribe in the bottom right corner of your screen, the square blue and white that says Halitics on it. Subscribe and click like if you like this. You can comment in the chat. I'm looking at the live chat, so I will respond to live chats. And if you call in 240-242-5646 while we're live, we'll get you on the air so you can talk to Charlie and me. You know, I've been asking you sort of the law professor questions, Charlie, and I'll be honest, I want to, be upfront, and I've said this on other programs that I've done. I'm really on the fence. I can't quite come down on either side. The amendment definitely doesn't require a conviction. The amendment is clear. I think it's clear that you're barred if you meet the terms, but it's not clear exactly what those terms are. So I'm on the fence, and I do like democracy a lot. I want people to choose their leader. So I see both sides of it. I really, truly do, and I can't come down. So I'm asking you the hard questions because I'm hoping maybe that will elucidate for our viewers, listeners, and also for me. You're a little more sure about this, and I have great respect for your opinion on this and many other issues. So I greatly appreciate your helping us with this, what I consider to be a thorny topic, thorny issue. So,
well, everyone's entitled to an opinion, and this certainly hasn't come up a lot in the last 76 years that I've been alive. But, as I said before, I just think we're in a unique situation. We're in a situation where the polarization and the cohesion of the polarization is high and cohesion is low for a lot of reasons that have to do with both parties sucking up to the corporate elite and the billionaires instead of taking care of working people. And in that context, I just don't see an alternative to going with the rule of law. And,
I think
in this case, if you want to talk about political strategy, so here, if you rely on the Supreme Court, here you have a forum where the accused can go before a court where a third of the members were appointed by him. So, I don't know how you could say that's unfair.
Well, I don't think anyone said it was unfair exactly. I think the question is whether the decision ultimately should be that of the people who governs in this particular circumstance, or if it should be. I'm sorry?
The Constitution clearly says otherwise. If he engaged, then he's not eligible.
Of course, but that's...
What?
Did he engage? And who gets to decide that question? Those are, you say it's so obvious, but it really isn't. It isn't obvious he engaged in insurrection, A, under the terms of the Constitution, and B, who gets to make that decision is also of great importance. In other words, who gets to make the call.
But if the Supreme Court decides it, I don't think the who gets to make the call question is a question anymore.
I'll accept that. If the Supreme Court says, okay, we've reviewed the evidence, we believe that the states who have blocked Trump followed the process, provide him with the process that is due, and their conclusion is reasonable, that's fine. I accept that. But I just think that it's going to be, it's not clear cut. It's not an obvious yay or nay. I think it's very challenging. And I think the decision, if it is to block Trump, will be, or not to, is obviously very controversial. As you said, we're so divided. We're at such loggerheads. Yeah. And this kind of, and I don't think this is a case really of the Democrat. Well, the Democratic Party kind of brought this on themselves, or Biden, I think, by not pursuing a charge. If they believe, and I think they do, that Trump committed a crime on January 6th, and they did bring charges, but they sure took their time about bringing those charges. Why not bring them much sooner? They didn't need that much time and energy and spend that much energy to prefer the charges. So that's an issue. The impeachment efforts were just clearly grandstanding and ineffective, and only calcified the divide. The Democrats would have been much better served, and I think you would agree with this, at least somewhat, they would have been much better served trying to ratchet down the tensions by governing in a way that would lead to better results for poor, struggling, working people, and reduce the enormous privileges and advantages that elites have in America. So
Well, I agree with the
their
last part
actions
of
have
that.
made things worse.
Yeah, I do agree with you had about nine clauses in that sentence, but I agree with the last one.
I think it was only 7, but okay,
But I
9.
don't think the impeachment was grandstanding. The post-election impeachment, and in fact, 7 Republicans voted with the Democrats, which is sort of breaking tradition to some extent.
But doesn't
Interestingly
the
enough,
fact that Liz Cheney agrees with you make you wonder whether you're right?
that's a very good point, Hal, and it does make I do feel uncomfortable ever agreeing with Liz Cheney about anything, because I think she's a warmonger and she's a corporate Republican. But if she's going to take the right position on something, I guess it's okay to agree with her. But what I would say is that it's not just about January 6th. He did things like the whole fake electors scheme that, to me, fall within the language of the amendment. Insurrection, well, no, those aren't violent things, or rebellion, or giving aid and comfort. Yes, it certainly gives aid and comfort to violent people who sought violently to disrupt the proceeding, which is the official determination of who's going to be the next president, by sending fake electors. And that's a complicated scheme. And he was told it's illegal and it's wrong and it can't be done. And he was told repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly. And he went through it anyway because he has no respect for law, in my opinion. So one thing
I think that's a great point, Charlie. I don't want to interrupt. I think those are terrible things that Trump did. That to me is almost worse than what happened, or is when when you put that into the January 6th situation and context, it really makes the January 6th look worse. And I think it does make stronger the case that he did engage in insurrection on the 6th. So all that is fair. And again, I'm really on the fence. These are not easy issues, but politically, I don't believe, and you seem to think it's a little easier than I do. I think politically, the Democrats have put themselves in a terrible bind because they may well be helping elect someone who could be even worse. And that, if that's possible.
that is a tough call. And I didn't prepare for that one.
But shouldn't we? I mean, if we're going to say Trump is barred, shouldn't we then say, well, what will be the implications of blocking Trump? How angry will 1/3 to 40% of the country be? Will they be willing to engage in something like January 6th or worse going forward? Will this mean that someone like a corporate killer like a DeSantis or Nikki Haley is likely to get elected? And do we want to take some of the pressure off of Biden by removing who he believes is his strongest opponent, and thereby maybe making, freeing him up to be the corporate neo-lib warmonger that he clearly is?
I suppose this is a technicality, but you do know that all these suits and charges have been brought by Republicans, right? Now it is Democratic-leaning nonprofits. I mean, I don't know officially that. It's Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington and Free Speech for People, and anyone can go to their websites and look up who the principals are, and they're the ones sort of organizing this. But all the people who filed the suits pretty much are Republicans. So maybe there's a few independents in there. I don't think this is a Democratic Party strategy. And I mean, for my part, the role that Get Money Out and I are trying to play in this is to correct what we think is a gap in Maryland's election laws, which is that Maryland does not bar ineligible people. It just is completely silent on whether an ineligible person can be put on a ballot. And I personally think that it's more important whether they're put on a general election ballot than it is whether they're put on a primary ballot. So I'm working to get a bill into the General Assembly that would say, if you're not eligible, you can't go on the ballot. And Maryland State Board of Elections and its staff do not check for age and residence or anything else. So I think that's, but I'm not getting like, oh yeah, let's do this. Let's get Trump. That's not the response I'm getting from Maryland legislators. We might have a bill, and we do have some support, and we do have some important delegates saying they support it, but we have obstacles to getting this done. And folks, if you go to getmoneyoutmd.org, if you go to getmoneyoutmd.org and look at costs of corruption, you will see how corporate corruption of the electoral process has yielded a politics that costs the average person about $9,000 a year and the average family of four almost $40,000 a year. In other words, it's changing almost everyone's life, your life probably, very, very radically. And so I don't disagree with that at all. And but that's on both parties. And the Republicans are just as bad or worse than the Democrats.
All right, and I'll put that link up. In fact, I'm going to put that on the screen, but we'll also put it out there in the show description. We do so appreciate Charlie Cooper being with us from Get Money Out Maryland. And I do ask folks, if you're interested, please give us a call. I'd love to talk to you as well. 240-242-5646. Don't forget to click subscribe in the bottom right corner. So you mentioned, Charlie, that there's a question of whether a party can nominate someone or put someone on their ballot in the primary who is not eligible. And that's kind of what the Supreme Court said of Michigan, which is, well, we're not going to rule on the Republican Party do whatever the hell it wants. We don't care. But when it comes to the general election, then we will take a very close look as to whether he's barred by 14.3. I thought the decisions in general were not anything for the Trump team to celebrate, even though he's on the ballot in all the states, even the ones where they ruled he was ineligible in the general election, meaning Colorado and Shenandoah in Maine. That's going to the Maine Supreme Court, by the way. But even in those cases, he's on the ballot. But all the states basically punted on the question if they didn't say he's out. They said, well, we'll look into this much more closely. This certainly is something that's within our purview. And I think that bodes ill for him if the Supreme Court ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately holds that states can bar Trump based on 14.3. But as you indicated, given the makeup of that court, this seems like an unlikely eventuality. One other point there, Charlie, I know I talk a lot about giving you your chance to respond. It comes across as very partisan. I agree with you that there's bipartisanship and there are people on both sides. There are Democrats who don't support this effort, by the way, even if they truly oppose Trump.
Right.
And again, I'm kind of mixed. I'm on the fence. But it looks to so many people partisan. You have a 7 Democratic justice Colorado Supreme Court where there's only 7 justices, and that court rules against Trump. It looks like it's, to the average voter, I believe, very partisan, and though we're broken down purely among partisan lines. And I also, like you have said, I think that's very unfortunate.
Well, of course, if the U.S. Supreme Court says he's ineligible to serve, it's hard to see how that can look partisan. However, just having this conversation with you has caused me to think about another wrinkle of what they could do. They could say that the due process wasn't sufficient, and they could remand it back to the Colorado lower court for more evidence, for more depositions, for more process, whatever, and then that would go back up to the Colorado Supreme Court. So far there's 5 states. All those states I say, are sort of at least Democratic leaning, although Michigan has been a swing state recently. Maine sometimes is a swing state. Minnesota sometimes is a swing state. We don't have a ruling from Arizona or Georgia or whatever. And I'm not in with the two nonprofits that are sort of the engines of this. So I don't know why they're going in the states they're going, except for one thing that I know. They're going in states that clearly say that if you're ineligible, you can't be on the ballot, and that have a decision maker who can make the decision in their state law. And again, Maryland doesn't have any of that.
Well, Charlie, I worked on this matter in Maryland for free speech for people when we were allied at our revolution with Free Speech for People. And they're one of the two organizations. And I think they really were just looking at states where they felt they had a decent chance of prevailing. And also, yes, swing states were important. But the big issue really was, can we win? Do we have a real shot at some success? And can we find plaintiffs? So I don't know just like you, I don't know all the details, but I think that we may see, well, Minnesota, it's hard to know. I think in the end, it will come down to the Supreme Court. But if Trump loses at the Supreme Court level, I don't see him getting reelected. I just think there's too many. This is too big I don't know what the word is. Is it such a huge distraction?
Right. I think if he loses on the question of eligibility to serve, that's it.
Well, I think what the Supreme Court might rule,
or
is
we're
that it's
in a
up to the
completely
states to
lawless
decide.
Situation where it'll be decided by guns.
It could be, though, that the Supreme Court leaves it to on a state by state basis.
Boy. Well,
although that's odd because the federal question is he covered under 14.3? So I don't know how that could be a state by state question.
Yeah, let's just review once again the absolute main point. The question of whether he can serve is a completely federal constitutional question. And the question whether he can appear on the ballot is a state question. It's not a federal question.
So you're saying it's not clear.
Hooray for Philadelphia in 1787.
But this amendment came in the wake of the Civil War, though.
Yeah, but the point is they set up this structure where they set up this federal structure where states run the elections, where the right to vote isn't guaranteed, where in order to preserve slavery, blah, 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 2 senators versus representative. I mean, I'm not exactly criticizing them. I'm just saying it was 240 some years ago, and it's a creaky structure that could use a bit of a rehab, but we don't have a way to rehab it because we haven't had a constitutional amendment in decades. And where we have agreement on what should be a constitutional amendment, we can't even get to the plate, much less first base. I mean, where we have agreement among the populace, like, limiting money in elections, and probably, which I don't personally agree with, term limits. We have agreement among the populace on those things. We can't get up to the plate.
Do you think that it's true? Oh, sorry about that, folks. My bad. Do you think that it's true? I don't even know what we just showed. Some sort of a stupid video that was up there. It was in Baltimore Sun, because I was trying to figure out what find your article that you had published, which congratulations on that. But do you agree with those who are trying to make this election a referendum on whether our democracy will survive? In other words, is it a good plan and is it accurate to say, if you elect Trump to the people, we are no longer going to be a free country? And is it also fair to say, if you don't elect Trump, we will continue to be a free country? So is that true, A? And then B, is that likely to help Biden win, if that's what you want to do?
Yeah, so as president of Get Money Out, I don't have an opinion on that. But as Charlie Cooper, I do fear that electing Trump could be the end of democracy in the United States. And while it's an extremely imperfect democracy, as you can tell by looking at any Get Money Out document, it's better than no democracy. I mean, we do get to vote. For example, in the last election, Get Money Out encouraged people to work against candidates like, oh gosh, I've forgotten her name now. The Republican woman who ran for governor of Arizona, and the guy named Marchant who ran for Secretary of State of Arizona, and we supported Adrian Fontes. And several of those candidates won by a few hundred votes. We were active in helping what we considered to be pro-democracy candidates in Nevada also, and 2 out of 3 of those won. So, yes, I think Trump is a big threat to democracy. Do I think that the election of a Democratic president guarantees democracy will continue? Well, it at least puts the end off for a while. But I mean, we have extremely serious criticisms of the way the Democrats govern in terms of the mainstream Democrats promoting corporate constitutional rights and relying on the big money to win their elections. So no, we don't have confidence in a political party at all.
It's really just so disheartening. I mean, I hate to be there, but I mean, I don't. The truth is the truth. I mean, reality stares us in the face. I may think that Democrats overstate or exaggerate the risks that Trump poses, and they may, minimize the harm that the Democrats themselves are doing. But ultimately, I think we agree both choices are bad ones. Both are not leading us to a good place. Maybe you think one choice is even worse than I do, and maybe you think one choice isn't as bad as I do, but neither one of us is very optimistic or has real optimism for the future. I don't know what to do about that. I asked a question. I'm not going to get into where you stand on the Palestinian question. We're not going to talk about that today. But I asked people who criticize some of the strategies that those who who oppose our policy in Palestine and Israel should do. If you don't like blocking roads to airports, what should we do? What can we do that would be effective? And ultimately, people throw their hands. Well, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. Protesting, going to our Congress members has no effect. They don't listen to us. We don't write big checks. They don't do what we want them to do. So
offline, I'll tell you why I somewhat
propose?
disagree with you. But I would like to say what the positive trends in the U.S. are that I see, aside from the fact that there's a million questions that poll in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like raising the minimum wage, like getting money out of politics, etc. But if we look at what's happening in the union movement in the United States, I think we see some real hope. And it's not just, although Joe Biden has done some really good stuff in this regard, but mainly it's because frontline workers are organizing, and they look around and they see what we've talked about, which is corporate rule, and said, I'm not putting up with this all my life. I'm 26, and I don't want to live like this the whole time. So I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to work with my fellow employees to win something. And I tell you, if it were up to me, the next president would be Sean Fain of the auto workers. It's probably not up to me, but anyway, I mean, this guy is a real leader who motivates people and who has brilliant strategies. And he's just won billions and billions and billions of dollars for they together have won themselves billions of dollars. And that's a great thing. The second thing I would say, there's a guy named Matt Stoller who has a blog called Big on Substack, and he follows antitrust law. Antitrust law was passed, in the beginning of the 20th century, and then the corporate types, led initially in the 70s by a guy named Robert Bork, convinced the whole federal judiciary that it was all a bad dream and there is no antitrust law, and lack of competition is just great for consumers because it lowers prices, which of course it might do temporarily, but in the end it raises prices. And so that's all being undone right now. And I mean, Google's in trouble. They had to reveal that even though they tell you that the only reason people prefer the Google search engine is because it's better, but they had to reveal in court that, oh yeah, but we also pay Apple and Samsung $26 billion a year to make our search engine the default search engine. So if it was that much better, I don't think they'd be shelling out $26 billion a year, would they? So the point is, in this antitrust realm and in the union realm, we are seeing real progress. A lot of that is what people are doing for themselves. So people, if you're out there, do for yourself. Organize. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your fellow employees. Talk to your church members, synagogue or mosque members, and get together and keep doing stuff. Don't give up.
Well, I appreciate that, Troy. It's a little bit of warm water to counterbalance all the cold water we've been dousing each other and viewers with. Yeah, I mean, I do hear that. I think it's fair, and hopefully for some working people, things will get better. But they've just been getting worse for so long, or at least not getting better. And that brings me, and I know we're going a little bit off track, but we're sticking with the election issue. Unless you have more you want to say about 14.3. Sorry for the little clogging, by the way. I'm eating my lozenges or sucking on my lozenges, which you can hear. Otherwise, I'd be coughing and hacking, and it wouldn't be pleasant at all. So you have to put up with a little bit of unpleasantness to avoid a lot of unpleasantness. Did you want to say something else about 14.3, or maybe just how people can get involved? They can go to getmoneyoutemd.org. You see that on your screen. You want people to get involved in this movement. It seems legal, though, more so than popular. Or am I wrong there, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is, and if you do go to getmoneyoutemd.org and sign up to volunteer, you can come to our Monday meetings. We're having a meeting on 7:30 p.m. Monday, January 8th. And the activity that we're doing right now is working on this bill, trying to get a sponsor for a bill so that ineligible people cannot appear on Maryland general election ballots. Other things we probably will be involved with is talking to the U.S. Senate candidates for the open U.S. Senate seat here in Maryland about the democracy agenda in the U.S. Congress, namely the Freedom to Vote Act that almost passed in January of 21, and that would set up a fund for public campaign finance for House seats, and that would bar gerrymandering and pass the Disclose Act and do a lot of great things, and also to restore the Voting Rights Act. So those are important things. We'll probably be working on that as the Senate campaign plays out. And, we're in the long term, we're looking for a way to get rid of the Citizens United v. FEC decision that said that corporations have constitutional right to free speech and to spend any amount of money they want to influence elections. The total amount spent for the 2020 presidential election was 15 billion, of which, I don't know, more than $1 billion was Bloomberg and Tom Steyer blowing their own horns fairly ineffectively. If you look at what $15 billion means in this economy, it's absolutely nothing. There are several billionaires in the United States that could pay for that all by themselves. So when you say there's no limit to what they could spend, you're basically saying that Elon Musk,
We're getting a
30
little
billion.
problem with your audio. Let me just, you cut in and out a little bit, but I think you were saying that Elon Musk can spend billions of dollars, right, to get himself or someone else elected.
If he just felt like it and he wanted to put up a substantial part of what he owns, he could double or triple what everyone else together is spending on a presidential election, which would include House seats and Senate seats. It's a ridiculous concept. It's a ridiculous concept that corporations that didn't exist when the Constitution was written have constitutional rights. But so that's our long-range goal, is to figure out how we can turn that around, and it's a tough fight.
Well, I really appreciate you're doing it. You are fighting the good fight, Charlie. We certainly, all of us who know you, appreciate that hard work and how important it is to do that. You know, I'm going to make, maybe this, I don't want to make you uncomfortable with religions, but I noticed, I was looking at your bio. I'm not going to be very specific, but I see that you attended an elite college university, somewhat similar to mine, maybe a little more elite. Do you find it like disheartening when you talk to people? If you do, your people from your year, similar, you know, people that you know from your school who don't seem to really get it. I mean, these are very obviously intelligent people, very well educated anyway, even if they may not be the most intelligent, because a lot of times people get into top schools and, you know, their credentials don't really necessarily merit it for a variety of different reasons, athletics, alumni, connections, the like. But all that said, people with top level education certainly considered to be, and they don't really seem to grasp how bad things are for so many people. It's often, well, I'm doing okay, things are fine for me. And there's such a disconnect. How do you deal with that? I see you nodding. I guess you face that. Also, how do you deal with that? Or do you just say, okay, throw up your hand and say that's the way it is?
Well, I don't send them any money. That's for one thing. I mean, if they're just going to be a mill to put out, you know, Wall Street people who exploit the situation and the lack of regulation in our financial sector, or they're just going to be, you know, the kind of diplomats that we see in the current situation, and just promoting a foreign policy that expands U.S. hegemony, that we should be in charge of everything, or as Biden says, I'm sitting at the head of the table. I don't support any of that, and I'm not very proud of what these institutions are doing. And I don't think that their definition of merit is accurate.
Sorry, there was a quiet time there. I'll cut that out, folks. Real quick, short point, Charlie, is it's disheartening for me that people that I would hope would see things the way I do, based on maybe a shared background in some way, don't. That's it.
Intelligence, as defined by the elites, is not the same as wisdom, and it's not the same as right and wrong.
Correct.
And
but do you think the elites always get it wrong in terms of, I mean, intelligence is not morality, right? You can be an intelligent person and be a bad person. You can be a stupid person and be a good person. And obviously those are terms, but still there is the meritocracy. It doesn't get it completely wrong. People like Mark Zuckerberg did come up with good ideas and did implement them. Whether we think they should have $100 billion, we don't, or not.
Well, and he misuses. He created a good thing and then he misused it. So, but anyway, people get mad at me when I say that Donald Trump is a genius, but his genius may not be the genius that you like or that the elite universities like, but in terms of being able to connect with people and convince them that he's on their side, he has a gift that almost no one else has.
Well, Bill Clinton had that gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And perhaps Barack Obama to a degree did as well.
He
Maybe
had a
not
little
to the
less
same
than Clinton,
degree.
but he had it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that says we, the people, aren't the best decision makers when it comes to who our leaders should be.
Well, we the people are busy. Most of we the people are busy trying to make a living and having to work longer and longer and longer at it. And the truth is, when my grandparents came to this country in around 1900, they had to work 60 hours a week, at least the men, and the women had to work probably 100 hours a week raising kids. And then when I was growing up, it wasn't like that. People got a break from that. They got the 40-hour work week, and they got wealth. They got to accumulate wealth. Not everyone, but certainly the white working class did pretty well. Nowadays, it's going the wrong direction.
Well, it's going the wrong direction for the black working class too. It's not just,
yes.
And even before Jim Crow laws were abolished,
Mm-hmm.
the difference in wealth between the average black family and the average white family was the difference was less than it is now. Mm-hmm. That difference in 1950 was greatly reduced into the 60s and into the early 70s. So you actually saw a compression, not just between rich and poor, but between black and white. And now we've seen both explode.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you make some great points about the labor movement, a resurgent labor movement, a resurgent antitrust movement that hopefully will continue and that can start to rebalance the scales.
You asked me something earlier that I didn't respond to, and that was what is this talk on the Democratic side about saving democracy a good idea? And I think that it's my personal opinion that if they want to win the election, they need to talk to the working class about bread and butter issues. For example, raising the minimum wage. For example, getting rid of the tipped worker rate. For example, explaining the situation around student loans. Biden tried one thing to give a pretty substantial break on student loans. Supreme Court overturned it. And yet he's getting the blame in the opinion polls.
Well, he started
and
the
then
process
when he gives a speech, it's about, support democracy. I mean, that's pretty, it's important to someone like me who studies this, hours and hours and hours every week. But I just think that if you want to win this election, you've got to respond to what people are feeling, which is that I cannot afford the rent and the food budget. And that would make a huge difference. And, talk about what you're trying to do to help. If you've done something to help, explain it. If you've tried to do something to help and someone else has blocked you, explain that. I don't hear them doing that very much.
Charlie, we'll leave it at that. Great chatting with you. Thanks so much, Charlie, and have a great year. I mean, I hope things are better. I hope we're in a better place in 363 days than we are today.
Agreed.
And that'll do it. Thank you again, Charlie.
It's 364 days, though, Hal. You forgot about leap year.
It is leap year. Wow. Right. Presidential years are almost always leap years. Not always, right? Aren't there some? There's a few exceptions.
0 zeros in the leap year.
The 3 zeros, right? There's no. Or 2 zeros. But maybe 3 zeros there are, but 2 there aren't. I'm not.
Well, 3 zeros is a long way off.
Well, we just had 3 zeros. And I don't know if that was a leap year, 2000. I don't know. All right, that'll do it. Thanks, Charlie. Great chatting with you.
Right.
And I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully we'll get those new bugs that are old bugs ironed out before I come back tomorrow. Take care and Happy New Year.